In the last video, we modeled a high poly dagger and then a low poly dagger and baked the normal map. So again, just a quick review. This was the high poly. So looking at this, we zoom way in on it. We have really rounded edges everywhere. I guess not everywhere, but in the places where we need a little bit more detail. So like here where it kind of simulates the wraps, you can see where stuff was kind of beveled in and whatnot. This little guy, a little bit of visual interest here. And again, the blade had this little inset section that these little areas were beveled as well. So let's go ahead and look at the low poly with the normal map applied. So if I look at this, let's turn the wireframe off. I know that this is just one single edge at this point, but you can see that it has this little transition where it kind of looks like it's a little bit rounded. Same thing with right here. This part, if we look at it down here, silhouette-wise, we can see that there's no change here, but as soon as I zoom out and look here, it kind of feels like it indents a little bit right here. And again, you can see the light playing off it right here. So the other thing, just to mention real quick with these normal maps, if I go to View and then Edit Viewport Light, I can left click and drag around, and this is just changing not my light here, but a viewport light. So that's the light that lets you see your 3D geometry. But as I move this around, so I move it over to the left side, so it's over here, you can see that it's casting a light and it's shining right here, and then it's casting a shadow here. And if I move it to the back, you can see how this kind of interacts and plays with the surface and makes it pretty much feel like there's a little bit of an indent here. And again, there's just more detail here than you'd normally expect. So what we need to do now is we just need to kind of finish the other textures on this dagger. So we'll go ahead, we'll make a diffuse map, we'll make a metal map, we'll make a gloss map, and then we'll probably call that good for this. So like I've done in the previous videos, what we're going to do first is make a couple helper maps. So the first one that we're going to do is going to be an AO bake. And again, we've done those before, so again, a lot of this is going to be a little bit of review. So if I look at my scene currently, we're going to kind of rebuild this after a bit, but right now we just have the dagger low, the dagger high. We're going to leave that turned off. Our UV map selected down here. So again, just to make sure, jump to the UV section, and our UVs kind of appear as they should. So I'm going to jump right into the folder, and I made this, it's just a white texture made in Photoshop 1024 by 1024. That's just called Dagger AO, and we're going to use that for the image bake. And again, we could jump to the Images tab, create a new image like we've done before, but this is just a different way of doing it, just to show you guys. So I'm going to throw this dagger texture into this LP dagger material. So again, that was just a white texture. It applies, and now you can see that it's all white in color. So now what we're going to do is go up to Final Color, go to Lighting, change this to Ambient Occlusion. Let's go to Properties real quick. We have this Ambient Occlusion selected again, just in case you can see the properties changing down here as I click on different things. One thing I like to do is just click off, click back on, because again, that will make sure that you're on the right one. But if you're familiar with what the settings you're supposed to be seeing are, usually that'll just pop into the right one. So what we're going to do is go to this little occlusion raise down here. It's set to 64. We'll just bump that up to something like 512 just to get a better quality bake for our AO. So now what we're going to do is, again, we have our low poly selected. The normal map is actually applied. We want to make sure that that is applied. So again, a little bit different AO bake we're doing. AO is set to diffuse color, which is fine. This effector of this output is set to ambient occlusion. So what I'm going to do is go to render and do bake to render outputs. And again, the normal map is applied, so let's hit bake and see what happens. And again, this is going to take a little bit, but shouldn't take that long. And again, you can see the normal map baking out. I'm sorry, not normal map, the ambient occlusion. So it's done. So we'll hit save image. Go to our dagger folder, make it a PNG. We'll just save over that Dagger AO. So that's good. Now we're going to make a light bake as well. So let's do the image creation the different way. Go to the Images tab, add clip, new image, throw this in that Dagger folder, make it a PNG. And instead of it being Dagger AO, we will call this Dagger LB for light bake. Hit save. make it a 1024 by 1024, hit OK. Now we have that empty image in there. You can jump to the shading tree, and I have just this AO selected, so I'll hit add layer. Whenever you add a layer, it adds one to the top. So we'll do load image, and we'll just go to that Dagger folder and add that image. Hit open, and you can see that it just adds it right on top, set to a diffuse color. So now this ambient occlusion, what we're going to do is we're going to change this to a lighting illumination total. And again, you can mess with some of these other ones. You get slightly different results. They're all pretty cool to mess with. But from here, what we're going to do is kind of that same thing. Actually, I misclicked that. Put that back to where it was. Actually, it looks like I added the AO twice instead of the light bake, which is fine. So I'll just delete the extra one, go to image map, load image, and we need to make sure that we grab the LB for the light bake. So again, that was just a mistake on my part. Sorry about that. So now we're good. The low poly is turned on. We know because the little eye's on there. Go to list UV maps, UV texture selected. We can see that because it's sitting over here. This guy, our light bake, is all the way up top. Illumination total. So this scene should be good. Only need to do one more thing, and that's adjust the lighting. So let's go to perspective, light, directional light, and we'll make this one facing the top. And again, this dagger is kind of the same on both sides. This isn't a character, so I can't tell the front of the character and the back of the character. So what we're going to do is this. Again, I want to have a light on the front and on the back, kind of at the top, facing down at about a 45-degree angle. Doesn't have to be exact. So let's go to our directional light, go to properties, go into, the directional light here, spread angle. We'll set this to something like 30, just so it's not harsh shadows. So what I want to do is I want to have this same light again. So I'm just going to hit right click. I'm going to go to duplicate, duplicate again. Now I have two lights sitting directly on top of each other with the same settings. I'm currently in one of my two. I'm in directional light 1. The other one, if I click on that, you're going to see it's pointing in the same spot. So I'm just going to really carefully rotate around to the back side. So now I know that this is kind of the back side. I can select, say, these polygons on this side, directional light, go to the other one, and you can see that they're selecting on the other side. So I know that my lights are on both sides. So from here, what we're going to do is go back to our shading tree, make sure everything's selected. UVs are over here. Should be good. So render, bake to render outputs. Let's see what this does. So overall, we can see it's working pretty well. So let's go ahead and hit save image. Make sure it's, set to a PNG. Save over our light bake. Hit save. And we're good to go. So what I'm going to do really quick is get out of my directional light so now I can move around and not have to worry about moving the cameras in a bad way. The other thing, if I want, is I can go ahead and delete one of these lights or both of these lights, just because this is kind of my light bake setup. If I was to go to my render tab and then render this out or something like that, I'm going to get a similar lighting scenario to how these lights are set up for the bake. And again, a light bake lighting setup is different than a render lighting setup in most cases. So now I'm going to be jumping over to Photoshop. So normally whenever we're doing textures in Photoshop, we'll do a texture, export UV to EPS, but we have the other textures, so we should be able to tell kind of where everything is. So let's grab these and throw them in Photoshop. So we have the Dagger AO, the Dagger Light Bake, and the Dagger Normal Map. So the first thing I want to do is go into the normal map and take a quick look at this. So right now there's no like filled background color. Realistically, we don't want to have kind of an empty space in the back. So what I'm going to do is fill it with this normal blue color. So let's just do the color picker and grab one of these flat area blues. Go to our color picker and let's look at this. So 127, 127, 255. Usually you want to do, actually, yeah. So sorry about that. Photoshop's a little bit different. Instead of being between the values being between 1 and 256, it's between 0 and 255. So the normal blue color is 128, 128, 256. But if 0 is a factor, then it'd be 127, 127, 255, so one less. So this is perfectly fine. Hit OK. New layer, drag this to the bottom, and just fill that with a blue color. And I'll actually just flatten this, hit save, and now our normal map should be all set. So as far as reading normal maps goes, kind of your best bet is if you go into the channels and hit the green, what's going to happen is now you're going to see kind of a black and white image of kind of green being the y-axis or up and down. So you can see the black areas in shadow. That's where something kind of recesses and light wouldn't hit if the light's coming from above the object. And again, same thing here with the blade. So this portion, this little guy right here, it's going to be catch a little bit of light right there just because it's angled up towards you. And again, this one right here, this blade is actually flipped the other way. So our blade is pointing down. So looking at this one, the blade is pointing up. So now the green channel is going to be the opposite. So instead of this being the whiter color and then this guy down here being the darker color, it's flipped, so it's the opposite. So again, direction matters as far as your UV island rotation. If this was to rotate, so it was facing down, this point was facing down, you'd get that same thing where this area would be white, this area would be black, just like this one. So black, white. And again, the other thing potentially would be the red channel. That's going to be kind of left and right. So realistically, we filled this one, so we're done with that texture. So let's jump over and look at the AO and the light bake. Let's just bring both of these in here. So again, this one, I could technically, if I wanted to, I could apply this image as a black and white image to my 3D object and take a look at it. But realistically, it should be fine. Again, there's a little bit of gradient right there, or gradation. Kind of looks noisy almost, so we could smooth that out if we wanted to. We're going to keep this kind of basic so the video is a little shorter, but just know that you could come in Photoshop or painting right inside of Modo and doctor either of these as a black and white image. Again, we've mentioned this before, but it's not 100% needed. The other thing I want you to notice is looking over here. This is the light bake. So you can see that even though our geometry, let's go ahead and turn all these off. Our geometry doesn't have anything on this. This is just flat geometry. The light bake takes the AO, or the light bake takes the normal map into consideration. So I can get more color detail from when I'm creating these helper maps from my normal map than if I was just baking it with a flat, like this handle is effectively a cylinder. So all of this information just wouldn't be there. So again, that's a really cool thing you can do, and you'll see this in games a lot, where people will do a big, huge, fancy sculpt and get awesome normal maps, and then in game they actually won't even use the normal maps, but they'll use the normal maps to help when they're creating their textures. Go over here, you can see the same thing with the AO. You can see really faint little darker lines in here. So again, the AO and the light bake, both of these take the normal map into consideration. That's why we had that turned on. So now what we're going to do is let's just hit File, New, and we'll call this, so we'll make it 1024 by 1024. Oops, want that to be the same. Resolution fine, RGB 8-bit, all good, create. So let's double click this so it's not a flattened image. What this is going to be is our actual working diffuser, our albedo. So let's hit Save As, go into Dagger, go into the correct Dagger, and this one, instead of it being Dagger LB, it's going to be Dagger Diff for diffuse, or you could call it albedo. Doesn't really matter at this point. But this is actually going to be a Photoshop file. We want to have a lot of layers in this guy. So let's hit Save, hit OK. So now we're going to do that process that we did in the light bake and the AO video. It's fairly simple. I would recommend getting an action for it. So let's do the AO first. So we're just going to drag, hold Shift, drop, and that drops this guy right into image. Or again, you can see that as long as you have snapping on, view, snap, this should just snap right into place. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the black pixels and keep those and get rid of all of the white pixels. Again, we don't want any of the white pixels. We want just the black. So If you have an action, I have one right here for it. I just hit the button once. It does it, and now I have just the black right here. So again, if I was to change the color of this to something like a muted red, you see it's just the black, whereas this one down here is the entire bake. So again, you guys don't have this action. If you'd like this action, just ask and I can give it to you. It's really simple. But we're going to go ahead and do it manually, assuming you don't have that action. So let's just delete that. So now this is just our black and white image of the AO bake. So what we're going to do is we're going to take advantage of, actually this is in there residually from my action that I did up here. I'm just going to delete that out. So this is what your file should look like. So what I need to do is again take the black. So what I'm going to do is take advantage of how your mask channel is going to work inside of Photoshop. So again, I can just grab this entire layer in any manner as long as I grab the entire thing, copy it, new mask right here or a new alpha channel, hit paste, and I can just deselect that. So now how this works, if I hold the control key and tap right here, what it's going to do is select all the white pixels. Again, we wanted all the black pixels, so what I need to do is invert this, so control I, that inverts my image, and now I can hold control, tap on the thumbnail area, that grabs all the white pixels, which we just inverted, so technically they're the black pixels. Go ahead and hide this, new layer, and now I'm just going to fill this with black. So I'm just going to do Alt backspace for my fill. So now I can go to channels, delete this out of there, and technically let's turn this off. I don't need this black and white one anymore, but let's keep it just in case. AO underscore bake, and we'll just move this to the bottom. Again, this will just be good to have in our working PSD file in case we ever need it. And now we have this guy, which is again just the black. You can tell, you can see the red now. So now what I'm going to do is set this guy to a soft light, and you can see that now instead of it being making it desaturated, it's kind of saturating it, making it more of the actual color that we want. We're going to set that to a soft light. Let's go ahead and name this real quick. Just call this one AO and call this one base red. I'll just call it base. So at this point, Dagger is done, or the AO is done. So now let's do the same thing with this guy. So with this one, it looks like pixels are going to the edge just to be sure on this, because how this does a little bit of a goofy bake. I'm just going to fill the background with white here and then flatten that, because now I just have a big square image, so I can just be sure when I move it over here that it's not offset a little bit. And again, having white in the background isn't really going to hurt anything. So this one right here, let's go ahead and name this LB for light bake. We'll call it bake, be a little redundant, but that's fine. So this is the light bake. So let's do that same exact thing. We want to get the black out first. So let's copy channels, new, paste, Control I to invert, Control D, that just deselects everything. Holding Control again, tap on this little thumbnail. That's going to grab all of our white pixels. Turn this guy off. Actually, I have to go to that guy first. New layer, Control or Alt backspace, or you can just do the layer fill, either or. Now this one will be LBD for light bake dark. So again, remember the light bake, when we do this one, we want to grab the light out as white and the black out as dark separate. So this one we'll go ahead, set to soft light. Let's turn this off so I can see when I turn this on and off. I get all this cool detail, again, without me having to manually texture anything. So now let's actually move this light bake all the way to the top. Let's clear this out and effectively start again. Actually, let's not clear it out. Let's hit undo. Let's look at this. So again, we hit invert. We took the dark out of there. So let's just invert it back to where it was. So again, that'd be the same as copy pasting the normal light bake back into here. Now let's just go from here. So Control click, that grabs all the white pixels, which is the light in the light bake. Click on this little RGB guy up here, go to layers, new layer, And now I want to do a fill of white. So control backspace or layer fill your foreground or background color correspondingly to whatever one you want. So that should be good. So I'm going to just take this guy, the light bake, drag him down below the base. Now we have this. Let's name it LBL for light bake light. Put it down by the dark. And let's turn all these off. So again, now this is pure red. This is the light of our light bake. We're going to set this one to overlay. You can see that's going to really brighten things up. So now what we're going to do is let's just turn all these on. So now we can kind of see everything that's going on. And I can realistically tell kind of what everything is. So let's go into this base, and now let's fill these color-wise. What I'm going to do is actually just do this the fun way. Take a paintbrush, check my opacity, brush pressure sensitive, all that stuff. So opacity 100%. I just want to make some colors here. So let's make a very light gray for the blade. And again, this is just going in the base color. So I can hold the shift key and that'll give me a straight line. Let's actually go from here, shift to there, a straight line. So that's the entire blade. This guy, let's make this a gold color. So again, if you remember back to the video, if I want to do a gold color, I actually want to grab, I'm not going to do this like mathematically perfect gold, but somewhere in here, a really light yellow. Bump, bump, put those in. Do a slightly darker gray. That's for these areas. And again, this is, you can see why this padding is important. Again, it's giving me a good amount of padding. So the actual pixels end here and it pads all the way out to here. So realistically, we can just count that by doing a little selection. So you can see that my padding is set to 16 pixels at this point. And again, you can change that in the settings. So let's just hold shift and tap on these to get some straight lines. Again, I could probably use the color fill tool, but just having a little bit of fun with this. And realistically, this whole section right here, all the way over, can all be filled the same color. So the other thing you could do if you wanted to is, like I have the gold here, I could put that gold on a separate layer. I'll leave that one up to you because again, if it is on a separate layer, I can just quickly go in, select it, change its color. I would recommend doing that. But again, it's not really a big deal in this example. So now what we're going to do is we're going to select a brown color for the leather on this. Again, you can make it a little reddish brown. Oops. I am delete that mask real quick. Again, that mask was only needed for the creation of those textures, so not a big deal. So back to the paintbrush, and let's fill this in. Just being really careful. And again, realistically, the pixels are ending here, so I could kind of stop there, but again, I want to have that padding that again we talked about in about week, I don't know, 3 or 4 in the class, and why padding is important. And again, realistically, it probably would have been faster to just pick material colors and do that fake, but we're kind of good where we're at. So now what I'm going to do is these 3 bakes are kind of at the wrong opacities. They're really, really intense, especially this light bake, this white one, way too intense. We're going to take the opacity of this. Let's drop it down to something like 30. Turn that on and off, see how it's affecting things. Yeah. This AO, we'll leave that one at 100, and this sky we'll take down to like 60, something like that. So now we have kind of a little bit more subdued colors. So let's do a file save for this daggerdiff.psd, and I can apply a PSD directly to our file inside of Modo. Sometimes I've personally had some problems using PSDs, so normally I just switch it to a PNG and have that as its own working file. So let's go ahead. And now what we're going to do is kind of rebuild this scene real quick. So again, we have kind of all of these things in this material. Let's go ahead and clear those out. Go to our Images tab, right click, delete all this stuff. So now what I'm going to do is, realistically, I have my Dagger.lxo. We'll leave that kind of how it is. So now what I'm going to do is just grab my Dagger low, turn on the wireframe, make sure that's the right one. I'm just going to grab all of the polygons, copy, so Control C or Edit, copy, Control N or File New, so I have a new scene, and hit Paste. So realistically what this did is, if I go back to this old scene, there was all this stuff like illumination total and multiple materials, multiple meshes. There's just a lot of messy stuff in here. Again, texture group file. So instead of trying to undo all of that stuff and delete everything, what I'm going to do is just copy paste just the geometry into a new mesh. When I copy paste the geometry, that brings over the only material that I'm currently using in that copy pasted geometry. So now I have a much cleaner scene. There's a single mesh and a LP Dagger material. So let's go ahead and name this LP Dagger as well. And let's just save this file out. So we have Dagger, this one will be LP Dagger. So now what we're going to do is we're going to start getting into the metal and gloss maps. So what I need to do is set this up to be that Unity or Unreal shader. So let's go ahead, and do that. And again, this point right here should all be review. So I'm going to do add layer, go to custom materials and do Unity material. So that's in there. So now what I can do is I can start throwing in my existing textures. So we have our Dagger Diffuse and our Dagger Normal. Let's go ahead, throw that in there, throw this one in there, and let's minimize this. So the Dagger Normal, I'm going to change this. Instead of a normal map, it is going to be a Unity and then Unity Normal. So again, it's going to say this stuff, hit yes to all. That makes everything work. Dagger Diffuse, I'm going to go down to Unity and do Unity Albedo. So the other thing that I can do is, one, you can see that there's a little bit of a specular value on this that may or may not be desired. So what we can do is go to our settings here, and again, smoothness is set at 50%, normal scale. So this guy, let's set the smoothness to 100. And again, that's going to make sure that when we start painting that, it's at the accurate values that we want. Oops, it looks like I missed a little section right here. So I'll fix that off camera real quick so you don't have to see it. But again, that's just filling in that area with that same color. So I just changed that off screen. It was this little section right here. So let's jump back to Modo. And again, it's going to see that, hey, that updated. So we'll hit reload image and you see that it pops right into place. So we're back in business. There we go. So we can set our shading mode from default to advanced. And again, when you hit advanced, it's going to take a little bit for the engine to kick in. There we go. So now this has kind of the quote unquote Unity viewport settings. The other thing is I can see my light right here. That's going to kind of affect what's happening in the scene. So if I go to perspective, light, directional light, and as I change this around, that's going to actively update. Let's go back to perspective. You can just see how that plays with each other. So now what we need to do is create that smoothness map and that gloss map. So what we're going to do is just create two new images. So add clip, new image, save it as a PNG. And again, we'll call the first one Dagger Gloss, hit save, make that the same 1024 size, hit OK, add clip. Oops, don't want to do that one. I'm going to do new image, PNG. So we have the gloss, so this one is going to be the metal. Save and make sure it's the same size. So now we can go ahead and start creating these two maps. Before we do any painting though, we actually need to apply these. Right now we just have these two. So let's go ahead and hit add layer. Actually, since we're adding two, it'll take a little bit longer. So we have our gloss, have our metal. I'm just going to drag these right above these two. So again, having these named correctly is really important, especially when you start getting multiple textures. So gloss, let's go to Unity and change this guy to Unity Smoothness. Takes a little second to update. Metal, go to Unity again and do Unity Metallic. Let's go ahead to the gloss first. Let's jump to the Paint tab. And when we get to the Paint tab, let's actually make sure that we're still in the Advanced tab, which we are, so we should be good to go. So real quick, one thing I want to do is if I look at these images, both of these are kind of empty PNGs. They have no pixels to them. So I'm going to just jump inside of Photoshop real quick and close those guys out. I'm going to put both of these inside of Photoshop, and I'm actually just going to set these to black, so no metal or no gloss for whatever texture. Hit save for both of those, and then jump back over. I'm just going to hit reload, and real quick you can see the surface changed a little bit. Because realistically, I don't want to start with 100% gloss or 100% metal at this point. What I want to do is kind of add this stuff. So now I'm on the gloss. I can go to the airbrush. Let's have a white color. And now if I paint on this, you can see that it's getting more glossy as opposed to starting all the way glossy. So again, I have them set both to black to have both of them be quote unquote off. So now what I can do is just grab these really big brush. So my gloss right now, it's currently, instead of setting it to like 100, let's set it to, and again I can kind of look over here and see the value of it. So if I slide it all the way to the right, that's 1 or like 100%. If I slide to the middle, that's 0.5 or like 50%. So let's start at about a 0.8 for this. Let's not have a soft brush. And just kind of fill this in. Let's grab the blade and this guy as well and fill these in also. And again, since this is a lighter color, it might be a little bit more challenging to kind of see what's going on with it. But the gold, just hit Shift A so I kind of zoom into it. The gold is going to be a little bit easier to see how glossy it is. Let's go to the metal. Let's crank this up to 1 and kind of fill this in. You can see how this is getting nice and reflective. And again, these images are just black and white images. So if we wanted to, let's go ahead and save both of these. At any time, we could take both of these images, jump right inside of Photoshop. So we have our gloss, we have our metal, drag and drop, and I could just start filling these colors in. Again, you can see where I missed a little bit right there. So again, I can paint right inside here or right inside of Moto. It doesn't really matter which one. Let's go ahead and hide this because that one's going to be the leather one. And the other thing, depending on your brush sensitivity, you can see that this is like painting in strokes. So this might be something to where instead of doing it with opacity, you just want like 100%. So that might be a better scenario where you would go to Photoshop and actually fill that stuff out. But that's kind of just a personal preference thing. It just depends on how accurate you need to be. Let's turn that off. Now we can look at this and we can see how shiny everything is. It's kind of playing with that normal map well. A little bit of weird stuff going on here. That must have just been from the normal bake. So if I actually look at the normal map, let's take a look at that. I'm guessing that's going to be present in there ever so slightly. Yeah, you can see that in there. So let's jump into Photoshop. Oops. Actual Photoshop. Throw that in there. So if I zoom in right here, this one's actually looking good. This one's the one that's a little bit warped. So again, that's one that I probably didn't have my smoothing. I had my smoothing set on this side, but not this side. So again, maybe if I adjust the levels, it might be a little bit more apparent. Oh, maybe not. Oh, there we go. If I crush that a little bit, this is what you're seeing right here. So again, I'm not going to worry about fixing that for right now. It's not really that big of a deal. But that'd be something that if this was the amazing portfolio piece, what I could do, there we go, would be just adjust the smoothing right here on that high poly, redo that bake, and that wouldn't show up so bad. So from here, let's go ahead and do the leather. Let's isolate that selection. Metal, this one is going to be pure black, which it should already be. Yeah, it's already in there. The gloss, though, let's actually set this, because again, leather is going to be kind of shiny. Let's do like a 0.4. So actually, undo that real quick. I had the wrong thing selected. So when you're painting on images, you don't want to select them here. Actually want to go here and select them. So gloss here, set to that roughly 40. So now you can see this gloss coming in. And again, texture-wise, let's go ahead, cancel this, close this out, and let's bring up this. The sides of this are probably a little bit too dark. So let's go ahead and grab our main diffuse, grab this guy, and it's probably this light bake dark. So let's take this guy down to like 40%. This one to about 20. And again, I could manually go in and adjust this as well. So we'll just do a file save as and save over our Dagger Diffuse. When I go back, oops, actually I have that right here. So now when I go back to Modo, that'll ask if I want to update. Just right there, hit reload. You can see that's a little bit different now. So we have our gloss values set on this. And again, these are just kind of rough fills of where the gloss is at. Let's go to the metal map. Just make sure that's filled in, which it is, that's good. So the other thing that we could do if we wanted to, and again, this was covered in the other video, would be I could add an environment to my scene. So if I grab one of these guys, let's do this one right here. If I just double click this, it's going to add that environment to the scene. So now I'm getting actual colored reflection. So this is actually starting to look like metal. The other thing is I can see this weird spherical node thing, this guy. So what I'm going to do is turn off this little texture group node right here. And that'll make that so it's not so apparent. So on the paint tab, what we could do now is now I could get in and be a little bit more articulate about what I want to do with this map. So technically in this little area right here in between these straps, I could say that metal it's going to be none, but gloss wise it's going to be significantly less glossy. So again, let's do just a test stroke. Yeah, there we go. So I can say, okay, this area isn't going to be as glossy because either dirt's collected in here or just something. So the other thing, let's go ahead and let's duplicate this light. Go into that light and rotate around to the other side. This is just so we can get light on both sides of our object. We can go back into perspective mode. So this point right here, this is going to turn into the scenario where you can put as much time into this as you want to make it continually look better and better. Because again, if I come in here, let's go ahead and isolate the selection. I guess focus in on it. If I go in here and I paint these straps around like this, so again, we're having less specular value where this line is, because again, that's where potentially dirt and grime is going to collect. I can go ahead and do this kind of all the way around on all three of these straps. I won't do it to the whole thing, obviously. But then what we can do is switch to the Dagger Diffuse. And right now I actually don't want to paint on this diffuse because again, this diffuse is technically this flattened image. So I actually want to do a new image. And you can think of this new image as a new layer I can throw in my PSD if I want to. So images, add clip, new image. We will have this be a PNG as well. So we'll just call this Dagger Diff underscore layer 2. Hit save, make sure it's the same size, hit OK, and we'll just add this right on top. Oops. Well, instead of, it doesn't really matter. Grab this guy, put it on top. And again, we need to change this to Unity albedo. So there's kind of two different layers on top of each other. So now if I make a stroke on the albedo, it's going to be a separate layer from our main diffuse, which is right here. You can see the layer stays. We're just working with layers. So let's undo that. Oops, I have to undo that a couple times. So we undo the actual stroke. And now I can middle mouse click. Will let me go to the actual diffuse, middle mouse click, we'll color pick this, go back to this layer. So what I'm going to do is grab this, change it to a little bit more of a red, make it a little bit darker, and now I can come in here and just start modifying this texture-wise. So again, gloss-wise in here, we're going to, actually let's make it a little bit darker. Gloss-wise, we're going to have a lower gloss value in here. And then color-wise, we're going to make this a little bit darker. So again, I can sit here and do this all day, but again, I'm guessing you guys get kind of bored with that. But regardless, same thing here. I can kind of go all the way down the length of this, put as much detail in here as I want. Because again, this is the part where it comes into you making this your own dagger effectively, putting as much or as little detail in there as you want. So real quick, so we're not doing the same thing, let's make this a little bit whiter, do a little test stroke. Oh, that's really hot. So we'll just take the opacity, drop it down to like 20. There we go. So now what this is going to kind of simulate is this would be like, if this is leather, this part right here on this edge sticks up a little bit. So it's going to be getting worn a little bit more than the other parts. Something like that. So let's do this a little bit quicker. Because ideally we don't want this to look like extremely rough and rushed, but I also don't want the video to be really long. And again, I've seen another kind of focus where I'm only working on the front of this dagger instead of the front and the sides and the back and whatnot. So zoom out, you can see this is starting to get a little bit more character. So from here what I can do is let's switch this back. We're in the realm of black and white. Go to our gloss map. Let's actually switch that to all the way white. So now what I can do is I can make this a little, before we were at that kind of 0.4, 0.6, 0.5, give or take. So now if I do a test stroke on this, this is going to be just a little bit more glossy. So I can say that these areas are worn. So let's actually do a little bit less glossy. And I could be like, okay, this part of the dagger is where the leather's a little bit worn, so it's a little bit roughed up right there. Something like that. And now we can make it a little bit warmer. And we have a low opacity still. So if I do a stroke, you can see that it's not going to make it overly hot. So let's, in the middle of this, just give it a few strokes and make it a little bit smoother, because this is where like the oils from the person's hand are going to be rubbing on it. So something like that. And again, now you can see how the light's playing with this, and then again we can go even further into detail. I'll start speeding this up a little bit. Let's go back into this layer, airbrush, set it to a very dark brown, almost black. And now realistically I could use like a texture brush or something like that. Let's crank the opacity, test stroke, there we go. So now you can start putting little dimples and imperfections and stuff like that in here. Realistically, this would be one you'd want to just grab kind of a big textured brush, something like that, and start putting all these little details and whatnot in here. So let's just try this charcoal one, do a test stroke. It's kind of hot, so let's a little less intense opacity density. Let's change this sky a little bit. Test stroke. There we go. You can see this is just adding a little bit of noise in here, making this look not so perfect. And again, technically, if we wanted to, let's actually just go to the gloss, change this to all the way white, increase the opacity. And this is just so you can see it better. But now you can see the surface of this, and this is just the gloss map. I roughed it up with the color. Now I can see interaction-wise with the light. This is starting to feel like leather. And again, I did the whole process in front of you, so I didn't do anything magic. But again, this is just one of those things of the more time you spend on it, the better and better it's going to look. And again, same thing with the metal here. This is looking really hot because of the highlight, so I could potentially either take a front light, oops, and turn that off, take my overall lighting itself, turn it down, whatever. But I could do that same thing. So again, we're just on that gloss map paintbrush, foreground color, set this to black. We have our little pattern selected. Let's get a good angle so we can see this. So now if I do this, again, this is super extreme, so you can kind of see what's happening. But now you can see that this is kind of gnarled up metal as opposed to it being something a little bit more perfect. And again, I could do this at an extremely low opacity, so it's not as apparent. But again, this is where I could start having fun with this. And again, I wouldn't probably want to use the same brush for everything, obviously, but I could make little pits in the metal. Same thing with the blade. You could even get, instead of your alpha being this little gnarly patch of stuff, you could have like a fingerprint brush. You could put little splotches of fingerprints along here. But again, with us just using the same brush everywhere, it's going to look a little bit weird. But for demonstration purposes, another thing you can see, this is getting kind of slow. So if that happens, you can sometimes isolate your selection and say, I just want to work on this portion. And then when you paint across it, it might work out a little bit better. Other thing is be mindful of the angle that you're working at. But regardless, I could do the same thing with the metal. Say that, oh, there's more pitting and whatnot coming up here, so it's less metal right here. Or I could just take the opacity and lower it, whatever. But regardless, you can see where this is starting to feel a little bit more like actual metal. The materials are starting to look a lot nicer. So let's say that I'm theoretically done. Let's go ahead and finish all this up. I'm going to go to the Images tab. In this diffuse, I didn't really modify this. I didn't modify the normal. This has an asterisk, so I accidentally painted on it. We're not going to worry about it. The gloss I changed, so I'm going to right-click, and hit save. So prior to that, my gloss currently looks like this. So let's right click, save, go in here. Now you can see all that extra stuff that I did is now all visible. If I was to just close Modo, I'd lose all this information. So again, I just want to make sure that I save this, Dagger Layer 2, save that. So now all of these are going to be black and white textures that I could then apply in whatever game engine I want. Last thing I'd want to do is actually, there's this Dagger diff, it's already open, Dagger Layer 2. I want to add this painting that I did to this file, so click and drag, hold shift and let go, and you can see that all this stuff is in place. So again, realistically, this it doesn't look horrible, it looks very rushed and whatnot, but if you took your time on this, you could get something that looks really, really cool in not that much time. And again, same thing with these other textures, just spend the time on them and make stuff look nice. And this could really easily turn into a really nice portfolio piece. So just a little bit of housekeeping real quick. Let's say I was going to put this in the Unity game engine. Again, I was using Unity shaders and everything, so what you see is what you get. But if I wanted to use something like the Unreal Engine instead, there's a few differences that, again, I've mentioned this before. So instead of a gloss map or a smoothness map, they use a roughness map. So to create a roughness map, I would just go into Photoshop, grab my Dagger gloss, literally Control I to invert it, file, save as, and I could save this as Dagger roughness, and I'll just put Unreal, because that's if I was going to use it in Unreal, hit save. Now that texture is set to go into Unreal. Again, Unreal lights things a little bit differently, so you might need to change these values a little bit. But overall, your map should work just fine. The other thing that might come up, depending on where you're throwing it, is sometimes your normal map might look a little bit weird, and this might happen if you take a normal map into ZBrush or 3D Code or something like that, because again, it depends on if it's OpenGL or DirectX or whatever. But if your normal map is looking a little bit goofy, normally what it is, no pun intended, is go into channels, go to your green channel, Control I, inverts your green channel. So instead of up being up, up is down, down is up. Because it just depends on the game engine. Sometimes Y up is kind of up, or Y positive is up. Sometimes Y negative is up. So this sometimes needs to be inverted. So now that it's inverted, I can go back to the RGB channel, save as. Instead of Dagger normal, it could be Dagger normal underscore INV green. So usually if you're providing something to a client, sometimes it's good to provide both. It depends if you don't know where they're going to throw stuff. Just know that that's a thing as well. So the last thing that I wanted to touch on before I let you guys go is this is just an example of the guy who made it. His username is JRD. Those are probably his initials. But what we have here is a very, very nice dagger. So again, this probably took more than the 3 hours that we took, 2 hours on our dagger. So again, we have a nice lion right here that this easily could have been just a 2D thing that was then baked in as a normal map. But again, looking at the surface of this, yes, the model itself is quite a bit more intricate, but details-wise, this probably isn't as intimidating anymore. If we go to all of our layers, let's just look at just base colors. This is what his diffuse looks like, or his albedo map. So I can go in this, and we have kind of little striations going down for either the metal is stressed or things are, we're paying attention to these black lines right here, where stuff's kind of dripping down. White areas where stuff's either chipped down or little pieces of stuff are kind of gunked down there. But there's kind of a little striation of the metal. You can see that like the thought of how was this crafted was put into this. Same thing with the blade. It's got these little white marks on it and whatnot for where the blade, it just isn't perfect. And again, there's different tones here where it's kind of stained here, it's stained here. The white parts would be where the scratches are at. The handle itself, same vein as our handle. It's got the little vertical lines, but this one just has a ton of vertical lines. Let's turn the wireframe on real quick. You can see, let's change it to something a little bit more gnarly. You can see that realistically, this is just a low poly handle. There's not really a lot going on here, but the normal map and whatnot, make it look like these things are bumping out, because you can see how the light plays with everything. But realistically, if we look at the silhouette, it's just a low poly handle. Same thing here. There's really nothing overly special about this. It's not anything that you guys could do. You just have to put the time in to make something that looks this cool. And again, having the thought process of and the design process of, okay, there's a little boring spot here. What are we going to do to make it visually interesting? Let's make this weird thing that looks like a cooling fan for a computer. Cool lion design, whatever. This could be something that he found, something he probably made himself, just painted it in Photoshop with the symmetry on. And again, other thing, potentially looking at this, it's going to be a little bit harder to tell, but if we go back and forth between his metalness, his roughness map, oh, he does not have it. Okay, so theoretical scenario, the roughness map, technically in these little white areas, if these were their own layer in Photoshop, he could have taken those into the roughness or the spec map and made those areas a little bit whiter, meaning that these areas would be a little bit more shiny. But realistically, it doesn't overly need it. It would just make it to where instead of this being a consistent shine, it would have a little bit of variation to it. This normal map, fairly simple. Again, there's the intricate designs here, but if you look at the overall blade of how this is all going on, it's not anything that you guys couldn't do. Again, it's just making that higher poly, more complicated dagger. Same thing here. It would be the same thing that we did, but instead of just 4 slices, he'd have 60 slices and do that exact same process. So usually it's good to take stuff like this, kind of reverse engineer it, see how it works, and then kind of go from there and create your own awesome assets. So going back to our hyper mediocre dagger, again, this is one that is more of a learning process. So you're just seeing how everything plays together. You're seeing that whole pipeline kind of from start to finish. So hopefully this helped you out, and you can take what you learned from this and make a really, really cool asset.